Putin threatens to cut off natural gas supplies to Europe unless payments are made in rubles. And this is why. I'm your host, Steven Van Metre, and thanks for joining me today as Russian President Vladimir Putin has demanded that payments for natural gas supplies come in rubles starting April 1st. And why, you might ask? Well, there's pretty good reasons. In fact, some of those reasons are not unlike why the U.S. seeks to protect its currency as well. And Russia will halt gas supplies to buyers from unfriendly states unless they switch to payments in rubles from April 1st, President Vladimir Putin said, the latest strike in a struggle with Europe over energy sales. And to buy Russian gas, they need to open ruble accounts in Russian banks, Putin told officials in a televised speech on Thursday. It is from these accounts that gas will be paid for starting April 1st. If such payments aren't made, we will consider this a failure by the client to comply with its obligations. And buyers should open special accounts in state-controlled Gazprom Bank to allow foreign currency to be swapped for rubles in settlements, according to an order signed by Putin. And it starts to make sense of what's going on here. Because a couple of weeks ago, we talked about how the ruble was getting crushed and losing value. So what do you need to do if you are a currency, a fiat currency? And it doesn't matter whether you're the global reserve like the United States or you're the Russian ruble, is you need to create demand for it. You need to get people transacting in it and using it. And so what is one way you can do that? Well, you can certainly demand that payments be made in it. And the other benefit here of what Putin's trying to do is create transactions through their banking system, because there's a lot of concern that the Russian banks are going to collapse. But if you have people transacting in rubles in your currency in this case, well, that means the banks are going to be around for a while. And so Russia aims to keep supplying gas to European customers even as it demands they shift payments to rubles, according to President Vladimir Putin, easing fears that the shift could lead to disruptions from the continent's biggest supplier. And Russia values its business reputation, which you might find interesting. We have complied and will comply in the future with obligations under all contracts, including gas contracts, he told officials in televised comments, laying out the new mechanism for ruble payments. We will continue to supply gas in the volumes and at the prices set down in the current long-term agreements, warning that shipments would be stopped for customers who don't accept the new terms starting on Friday. And European officials said change isn't likely to affect supplies, obviously not. For us, with regard to Putin's threat or announcement or plan, one doesn't really know what to call it anymore. To get paid in rubles, the main point is the contracts are being kept, according to German economy minister Robert Habeck. And this is important because if these supplies get cut off, well, what would happen to the European economy? Well, all of a sudden, gas prices would surge, energy prices would rise, and they would immediately fall into a recession. And that would then be the tipping point to send Asia and the United States and the rest of the world all into massive recessions. And so it's very important that they keep these supplies running, even if it means transacting in rubles. When Putin first announced a ruble payment demand last week, European officials rejected it, saying the move would violate contract terms. And contract terms are important for attorneys, because when Kremlin published the presidential decree outlining the mechanism to allow foreign buyers to convert their dollars and euros into the Russian currency through a state-owned bank. Again, that key part of keeping it through the banking system, keep your currency strong, and there's other reasons for this we'll get into in a moment. An official at the French presidency, speaking on conditions of anonymity, said the new mechanism doesn't change the payments as mandated in the contracts. Again, key part for attorneys, which will continue as before. But the official said France is preparing for a contingency plan against all uncertainties. And the Kremlin decree mandates the delivery starting April 1st, that is today, paid for in rubles. Foreign buyers need to open a special ruble and foreign currency accounts at Gazprom Bank to handle payment, which can be done remotely. Buyers transfer foreign currency to pay for the gas into their accounts, and the Gazprom Bank converts those funds to rubles on the Moscow exchange and transfers rubles into the buyer's ruble account for payments on to Gazprom. The payment is considered complete when the rubles reach Gazprom's account. And so what's happening here is you'll see predominantly euros, but perhaps other currencies coming into this Russian bank. Again, the key here, keeping this Russian bank, as important as possible in this system. This is what Putin's trying to do. And they're going to take that foreign currency and sell it on the open market to get rubles. And there you're starting to see it creates demand for their currency, extra demand, which is really, really important here. All right, so the Putin said the goal of the new mechanism was to prevent Western governments from attempting to seize the payments in foreign currency or the accounts through which they went. If gas supplied and paid for under a traditional scheme, new dollar and euro payments can be frozen. Well, and that's a concern too. If you're selling tons of natural gas and all of a sudden the payments come in and they immediately get frozen, pretty smart on both sides to be thinking that that is a possibility. But like I said, here you can see in this piece, another motivation may have been to protect Gazprom Bank, one of the few major Russian banks that so far avoided most of the severe Western sanctions from future restrictions. And if this bank is a critical piece in what's going on here, well, then you've got it. It's not going to get sanctioned because Europe needs gas. And Europe gets about 40% of its gas from Russia and is already grappling with fallout from record prices this winter. Economists said the impact on the ruble would likely be limited because Gazprom is already required to sell 80% of its foreign exchange earnings for rubles under the capital controls imposed after the latest sanctions hit. The shift would then effectively raise that to 100%, not a large enough change to have a major effect on the currency, but it would, perhaps not in an international sense, but in a domestic sense, it would give people confidence in their currency. The other factor here now is it creates this demand, as I've talked about. So if Russia's trying to trade to get things it needs, perhaps with China or India, they can say, look, we're going to pay for these goods and services in rubles, when previously they might have said, you know what, we don't want that. But now Russia can say, look, we have demand. See, Gazprom Bank is doing all this business in rubles, and that means perhaps that you might be able to go directly to some of these European suppliers and actually do the currency exchange at a better deal, creating demand for their currency. Now, when you think about it, it's not much different than what the United States does as a global reserve. And here we can see a chart of the dollar going back 43 years, and you'll notice that the dollar is relatively stable. Sure, there's times it shoots up and goes down and back up, but overall, it's fairly stable. And that is by design, because when you can get your currency to be used by a lot of people, it stays stable. And that's why a lot of people today are concerned about their portfolios and the fact they think the dollar's going to go away, but it's not. And if you're concerned at all about how your portfolio may perform in the future, well, be sure to check out Portfolio Shield. I'll put a link up there in the corner in the description below. You'll be glad you did, because one of the key things is trade, and trade deficit we see for the United States increased to 9.4% to $89.7 billion in January as good imports jumped 1.8% and exports fell. Wholesale inventories rose an unrevised 0.8% in January. And what does all that mean is a trade deficit says that we are seeing businesses imported more goods to rebuild inventories, potentially setting up a trade to remain a drag on economic growth in the first quarter, which is something we have talked about many times in the show and we'll revisit here momentarily. And the jump in the trade deficit points to a large drag on GDP growth, and accounting terms and real GDP growth in the first quarter looks on track to be close to zero, as strong demand gains are met by import growth rather than production increases. And here you can see the trade balance or trade deficit in blue, and here's GDP. And we've talked about how as the trade balance widens, gets deeper, that means GDP growth goes down. And simply because GDP is more a function of domestic production, and you look to that to see exports. So when you're importing more than you're exporting, your GDP growth should fall. And that's what they're predicting is perhaps a big zero coming for the next quarter. But it also, and again, we come back to this topic of what Putin's trying to do with his currency. Well, when you can get trade going on with your currency, it creates demand for it. And here we can see the trade balance against the nominal US dollar broad index. And what do we see? As the trade deficit widens, it creates demand for dollars, and that leads to a stronger dollar. And of course, we know that Putin is desperate to keep the ruble from crumbling apart. And in the case of the United States, when you have a strong dollar and you have a lot of trade deficit, well, people need to recycle those dollars back into the U.S. economy. And how do they save those dollars? Well, they do them through U.S. Treasury securities. And that's why we can see over time, as the trade deficit widens, you see here in red, 10-year Treasury yields head lower, despite the view that yields can only go higher. A wide trade deficit says yields are actually headed down. So now you have a better idea of what Putin is up to in terms of why he's demanding everything be paid in rubles. Who knows, it's the first step of more demands coming from him, but we can probably guess there will be. But it's really more to do with their currency and banking system. And when you kind of understand how the United States does something similar, we have our military and we use that as a means to protect trade shipping lanes, and we do a lot of things every day to make sure the dollar stays around. Well, it's real important in the fiat world. can go to zero quick. I'm Steve Van Metre. Thanks for being fans. Thanks for watching. Bye now.